welcome to People I Know Show, a podcast about interesting people, personal growth, and being wrong. I'm your host, Curt Carstensen. Joining me today on episode 13 of the podcast is Ron Johnson. Sports fans from Minnesota might remember Ron from his years as studio host and on-site reporter for Minnesota Twins Wild and Timberwolf game broadcasts on Fox Sports North. He and I spoke extensively about his sportscasting career and memories from his variety of experiences. I find that how I came to know Ron and have continued to stay in touch over the years with him to be one of the more unusual but also influential connections that I've made in my life. See photos and interact with the podcast by following the People I Know Show pages on Facebook or Instagram. You can check the show notes for links to those pages, as well as the link to Ron's new real estate brokerage that we speak about during the episode, Crosstown Home Team. Now, on to the conversation with Ron Johnson. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by Ron Johnson. Hello, Ron.
Hey, Curt, how you doing?
Doing well. And when I was thinking about having you on the show, I think back to the first time we met, and you and I maybe talked about this a little bit in our interaction since then, but I do know that we both went to St. Cloud State in the sports broadcasting department, and at some point, it was the spring of 2006, I had contacted you to be on the KVSC News Watch, I believe. So we had a conversation on that program, and then remind me again how I ended up on your email list to be invited to your house party like a few weeks later.
I don't remember, but I'm glad the funny thing is I was trying to figure out how I knew how I knew you, but not, or I knew why I knew you. I just didn't know how I knew you. More recently, I was thinking of this, because I knew we were both at KVSC, but at way different times, not even close to the same time. And I do remember the story, that you're talking about, the interview that you did. But I just couldn't put together necessarily exactly how it all worked out. But, yeah, you got on my email list probably because I had your email address. And at that point, I was working in broadcasting, and you were, I don't know at that point, were you aspiring broadcaster, up and coming broadcaster, or whatever?
I don't know if I was ever up and coming, but I was aspiring.
You were coming, whether you're up or not. But yeah, then I'd be lying to if I knew the exact reason, but probably because you reached out to me and we knew each other, and we had a connection from KVSC and broadcasting. So, and I like people to come to my parties. Okay, so the conversation we had on KVSC that day, I think it was you were working at Twin spring training, and Kirby Puckett had fallen ill. And that was, I think, some of the conversation that brings you kind of back to the time. But I don't know how long after the email came for the house party, but I got this, and it's like, I don't know you, but it was, I suppose, in a way, kind of a defining opportunity for me, because I think some people, or maybe a different version of me, would have been too afraid to show up because I don't really know you or know anybody there. Sure. But
I just decided to show up and see what happens. So I don't remember that much from that night, except I didn't really know anyone there that well, and I barely knew you. And on the invitation, you had said, like, if anyone needs to crash at your place or something, you could. And I'm pretty sure that was the night that I did. So it ended up being you and either your girlfriend or fiance at the time, however your situation was. And I stayed in the guest bedroom as just some guy you had maybe never met in person prior to that day, which is kind of strange. And now I don't know if I'd advise people to do this all the time, but the fact that I did it, you allowed for it, and we're still like acquaintances or friends or whatever we are at this point in our life, seeing each other periodically today, I think is a pretty neat story from my life.
Yeah, neither one of us got murdered, right? So
no,
you didn't get murdered by these weird people that let you stay at their house, and you didn't murder, this guy that we didn't know didn't murder us. So it was pretty good. But yeah, it was 2006. If that would have been, I moved back to Minnesota in 2005. So 2006, I had a housewarming party, a summer party that we've had every year since. But actually, Kirby died at when I was at spring training.
Yeah, I think it was that day. That day he did.
Yeah, so he died. But our party would have been later on, though. It would have been in like July or August or something like that. And he died in spring training. But yeah, it was, it's a party that we had. I think that was the first time that we had it. And then it was just, connecting with people or whatever. And so there you go.
So yeah, we are. I was there that day, and let's say you've had, I don't know, 10 or so of those since then. I've been to the majority. I'd say like 7 or 8 times you have this annual party and I keep showing up. And if not for that, I wouldn't see you very often or at all. But I think, just looking back in my life, that was a chance I took, I suppose, to do something that maybe was out of my comfort zone that
Sure.
at least worked out into us still being in touch today.
Well, the key to that whole story is that my 40th birthday, which was many years after that, we had a babysitter set up. My wife set up a party at, you probably remember the place. It's in Bloomington.
Yeah.
Whatever it's called. Poor Richards, in Bloomington. And then we had an overnight babysitter set up. The babysitter's grandfather passed away. So it's like for us, we found out the last minute. So we had no babysitter. So I put a posting on Facebook that said, "Hey, we need a babysitter." You reached out, and then your niece ended up babysitting for our kids that night overnight. We had never met her. We met her like the day before. And that she might have been 15, something like that, 14.
She's 17 now. So yeah.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, probably about 16. I don't think she was driving yet, but yeah. So your sister, who I'd never met. All right, I know that's not true. I had met your sister at that point at your 30th birthday.
Okay.
But anyway, the whole point of that is if we didn't meet in 2006, I wouldn't have had a babysitter for my 40th birthday party 10 years later.
You'd had to cancel your 40th birthday or bring your small children to the bar.
Exactly.
Which I wouldn't put that past you, but probably not.
Right. So that's the key. Don't be afraid to let somebody you don't know stay at your house, because 10 years later, they may have a niece who can babysit your kids.
It is the key. You got to know people, apparently. So you mentioned a few things there. Another thing that I remember is my 30th birthday. Preceding that, you had moved away from Minnesota for some time.
Yep.
And when you put on Facebook that you were moving back, I reached out to you and we got together, just kind of, I don't know for any specific reason, except that, again, I decided just to reach out and we got together. Went to some Northeast Minneapolis bar. I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, I don't remember. I remember sitting there in the booth, but I don't remember where it was.
And we played the bar trivia, which I don't think we were that good at, but It was something. And one of the things that came from that conversation was my 30th birthday. I was thinking about what I was going to do because it was maybe just a few months before. So what turned into kind of one of the biggest things in my life also, I went to 30 bars for my 30th birthday. And that idea doesn't exist if that conversation with you that day doesn't happen, because you had a story with one of your friends doing something similar.
Yep. Yeah. Langdon Perry, who's another KVSC guy, a good friend of mine to this day. He was another broadcaster. And at the time he was turning 30, and I don't remember whose idea it was, but somebody was thinking of what to do for his birthday. And he came up with the idea of going to 30 bars. So we went downtown, and, she's my wife, Nikki. She's my wife now, but I think she was probably my girlfriend at the time. Met up with Langdon and his then girlfriend, now wife, and a bunch of other people came through. But the four of us were the only people that survived all 30. I shouldn't say survive all 30 because some people didn't show up until like number 6, so they didn't have a shot anyway. But yeah, so that's where that idea came from. So we must have talked about that, and you decided to do it. And I guess you can share your experience.
Yeah, so I think
how that worked out.
Based on what you told me, the structure of that one with Langdon was a bit different. You just had your eyes set on 30 bars and you counted them and got to 30. Is that what it was?
Well, we didn't have it plotted out. Yeah, we started at one place and just kind of made our way. But the only rules were somebody in the group had to have a drink for it to count.
A rule that I stole from you.
Yeah, so it wasn't like every person had to drink, and the place had to have like an actual bar. So, like a bar with the stools or whatever. So like some restaurants or whatever wouldn't have counted. It had to have an actual bar. So those are the only two rules. And then, we hit all 30.
So this was, let's say it was a month or so before my 30th birthday that we met. And then I decided I would do it. And I plotted mine out. It was 6 bars in St. Paul. It was a Friday afternoon, and there was, I think, high school hockey or college hockey, something going on where St. Paul, West 7th Street was kind of happening by the Xcel Energy Center. So I put those on the list, and I'd walk through Mall of America one evening, counting all the bars that would qualify. And I found 18 bars in the Mall of America at that time. Today, it's probably different. So those were the middle 18. And then I was living in Hopkins at the time, and there was 6 bars that I found there that also qualified. So I made this list giving a time estimate, and I sent it out to anyone that basically I thought might want to join. And so many people said, no, you can't do, there's no way you can do that. Well, I made it to all 30. 2 people, I think, there's about 10 of us that went the whole day. 2 people also went to all 30 of the bars. My cousin Mike and my friend George, who was on the first episode of this podcast, even though he and I didn't talk about that on that day. He and I have had a lot of adventures. So what I recall from you, and I can get way more into detail on this at some point, but what I recall from you is we end up being just a bit ahead of schedule in the last place, which was the Wild Boar in Hopkins. I remember the time that my sister Michelle and my friend George were like basically carrying me out, because even though I didn't have a drink at all 30 of the bars, I would not have advised anyone. I did keep the list, and I wrote down what drink I did have at the bars I did have, and I signed my name at the end of each one, and my signature got much, much worse. But by the 30th one, it was time to go, and they were like hauling me out of there. I don't know if you recall.
I do.
And you were walking up to the bar.
Yeah, and I want to say it was like 8 or 9 o'clock. Yeah, it wasn't like 2 o'clock in the morning. Because I remember because I wanted to come out and meet you, and I thought maybe I'd have a shot at a couple. Meaning a chance at a couple of the other, late end bars. And yeah, I think as I parked my car, I was walking up, and I think I saw your sister and you, and you weren't in the greatest shape, but
no.
But yeah, I was surprised with how early. And that's the key, is that you can't start at, well, you can do what you want, but starting at like noon is going to be a struggle, but at least I guess you accomplished the ultimate goal of hitting all 30.
I think I had my first drink in the parking lot of my sister's apartment complex in Hopkins at about 10:30 that morning. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it actually was okay until, I guess, to out another friend that's been on the podcast, my friend Dave, that was on episode 12. He got me to drink a couple extra shots than I should have had late in that day. And that is anyone that's ever had a day of drinking. You can have a beer or cider. I drink a lot of cider now. If you just kind of pace yourself, you'll be fine pretty much as long as you want. But you add some shots on it late in the day, and it's over.
Yeah, that'll sneak up on you.
Yeah, so not to necessarily promote long days of drinking, but as an activity, I found for that birthday, that was very memorable. And I have a photo book with me and somebody that was there that day in front of every sign of every bar.
Oh, wow.
And so it's a neat memory. It wouldn't have to involve drinking, but I guess it did, and that maybe added to it in some way.
Yeah. And I think when we were doing it, it was before the selfie craze. That's how old we are. So we didn't get a picture at every place, but we hit 30 and all downtown. So that made it easy. So there was no, we just walked everywhere. So there was no worry about, driving or getting caught in traffic or trying to park 3 different times if you're going to 3 different locations. So it was a good time. We had a good time. I'm glad you did too.
Yes. So thank you for existing in my life to give me that idea. I don't know what I would have done on my 30th otherwise, but I can't imagine it would have been more memorable or more exciting. So
good. I hope you can say that at my funeral.
Well, let's not get into that right now.
That's the one thing that I could be remembered.
I would definitely tell this story if I had to. Okay, so I guess another thing that came out of that day, and maybe it was part of this, I had just recently moved up to the Twin Cities from Rochester and probably didn't really know that many people. So when we met before my 30th birthday, that turned into us being on a softball team for one season. Not the best softball team in the history of softball teams, but it was, I think, the other social, like regular social interaction that we had over the years.
Yeah, that was actually a team that my wife had played on for years, like going back to when she got out of college with her brother, like his group of friends. He's a couple years older than her, a few years older than her. So his group of friends had a co-ed softball team that she joined after she got out of college, and she played on that team for years. And then I joined once we got together. And I played off and on because my schedule was a little different then. And then we moved away. We moved to Nashville. So we weren't on the team anymore. We came back. We were gone for 1 year. We came back, I believe 2. So it was a lot of married or dating couples that were on that team and some singles. But 2 couples got divorced who were on the team. Well, one couple was on the team. They got divorced, and another guy who was part of a couple, but the wife didn't play. They got divorced, and then something else happened. So like in that 1 year, the team just fell apart. So we had no more team, and then we came back and we wanted to play. So we tried to resurrect that team. But only 2 or 3 people were standing. So then, we got it together for 1 more year, and then it didn't go well. So then we stopped doing that.
I think mostly didn't go well because we struggled to get enough players down the stretch, and that doesn't make it fun at all.
Yeah, it wasn't. Yeah. So yeah, that was at Lake McComas.
But I do recall that was when we played and had a whole team, it's still fun. I don't do that. And you play in any activities like that?
That's the last time I played. I don't do anything organized. I haven't. That's the last organized. It's through the park league. But no, I haven't done anything since then.
One thing I did notice in recent years, maybe as recently as this past year, you've been running in marathons, or at least some runs.
Yep. I ran one marathon. I ran the New York City Marathon in 2016, I believe. It wasn't 18. Yeah, 2016, I ran the New York City Marathon. That was my first and only marathon. Mm-hmm. After this past year, April, we ran it's called the St. Jude Rock and Roll Half Marathon in Nashville. And then I ran, they call it the Looney Challenge as a part of the Twin Cities Marathon. We're on Saturday. So Saturday, there's a ton of events. And then Sunday, there's the 10 mile and the marathon. So Saturday, I ran the 5K and the 10K. And then on Sunday, you come back and run the 10 mile. So yeah, running is something that I've I guess gotten more into in the last few years. Prior to having kids, my wife and I would run some 5Ks and 10Ks for charity and things like that. And we've done a couple of triathlons, but just kind of off and on. But I've gotten more into running more recently for a couple. It's something to do, and it's you just need yourself and some shoes and you get out there and run. So a way to kind of stay in shape and also give me goals, because it's hard for me to get up and work out. But if I've got a goal of running 19 miles in 2 days, then I've got something to push me to do that. So that's kind of where I got into that. Also just kind of helps me think and get away for a little bit. And where we live, we're close to the lakes, and it's a good way to see the city and stuff like that. So that's kind of where I got into running.
Yeah, I haven't officially signed up, but my brother did one last year, a Spartan race, which is probably going to push me quite a bit. But just knowing that that's 6 months away, I'm very aware that I need to be at least somewhat close to being prepared to do well that day, right? Which is going to take a little time. So it's good. I've learned that too with my 5Ks, or one time I ran a 10 mile. Just knowing that, having that in the back of my mind sure motivates me to get out there and get as close to being in shape as I can. Whereas if I had none of these things on my calendar, I wouldn't. I know myself. Right. Yeah. And the goal, it's just to finish and feel decent afterwards, right? Where you don't crumble to the ground. Well, so a little bit of training helps with that. And you said your one and only marathon. Does that mean you don't plan to do it again, or you just haven't? I haven't. And I don't plan. When I finished that, I said, okay, that's good. That's done. Yeah. It's one of those things I don't ever have to do that again. And my wife always says you'll do another one. I don't want to say I'll never do one again, but I really have no desire to train for another one again or recover from another one again. So if you could cut out the training and the recovery, good luck. Then I would do it. And I've got to find one. I wanted to do. I did one sort of to celebrate turning 40, if you can call it celebrating, turning 40. And the one that I wanted to do was New York, because I thought it would be the coolest way to see that. I've been in New York several times, but it'd be the coolest way, I think, to see that city. And it would just be a lot, everybody does, not every, but you run into every other person here in the Twin Cities. They've done the Twin Cities Marathon, or they've done Duluth. So I didn't want to do one of those. I wanted to do something different than the circle of people that I know. Mm-hmm. So that's why I picked that one. And it was a trip for us. So my wife and I went out there and, had a couple, I think 3 nights in New York. Only real one night out, because I was either resting for the marathon or recovering. But yeah, it was a little different than what most people that I know do. So that really motivated me to be able to do that one. Let's turn the topic back to something we touched on earlier, which was that I was an aspiring broadcaster, and you reached some pretty decent levels in that career before you left it. And as someone like me, that I guess the peak of my broadcasting career, well, hopefully it'll be this podcast someday. But if not, that might have been the couple seasons I broadcasted at the University of Minnesota for the women's hockey team, which, they're a very good program, but it still kind of shows where the highest level might be for someone that eventually gets away from that career. So if you would, where do you say the peak moment of your broadcasting career was, and kind of how you got into it and why you got out of it? A lot there. So I'll start with the first one. As far as peak moment, for me, it's not some game that I covered. I guess what I remember from those, or
I don't know. I never covered like a world championship, right? Never covered the NBA Finals or the World Series or Super Bowl or anything. So probably the biggest game I ever covered was the Sugar Bowl when I was living in Mobile, Alabama, as far as status of a game. But that wouldn't be close to even, and that's when I was working at a local station in Mobile, so that wouldn't have been close to the peak. I covered, here in town, I worked for FSN and covered the Twins and the Wolves and the Wild and Gopher hockey and some high school stuff and some Vikings things. So that was probably the most consistent, quote unquote, high level stuff that I ever covered. But just more like when I was in Mobile, I met Hank Aaron at Hank Aaron Stadium in Mobile, Alabama, where he's from.
Wow.
Like, so that, that lasted 7 minutes or whatever it was. So was that the peak? No, but it was probably one of the coolest moments. There's 2 times I've ever been starstruck as a sportscaster. That was one of them. And the other time was when I covered a Layla Ali fight in Mississippi. So Layla Ali being Muhammad Ali's daughter, she had a fight in Mississippi. We were in Mobile, and Mobile is, an hour and a half or something from where she was fighting in Biloxi. It was either Biloxi or Gulfport. I don't remember. But so we drove out there because it was in our television market, or at least sort of. So we drove out there, we covered the fight. And then at the end, everybody was kind of standing in the lobby, and then Muhammad Ali started walking by.
Wow.
Never in my life as a broadcaster have I asked for anybody's autograph. That day, and before that or after that. So that day it was me and an intern, and I said, hey, and I gave her my reporter pad and asked her to go get the autograph. And it was too crowded and she didn't get it. But, so that was the closest time that I'd ever done, gone to, asking for an autograph. So those are probably the 2 moments that stand out to me the most, because of just the iconic legends of who those 2 people are.
For sure.
And just with Hank Aaron, it was, there's a AA baseball field in Mobile, Alabama. And he was there. It's named after him. And he was there in town for some reason. And we all showed up, all the media people show up, and I got to shake his hand, and I asked some goofy question, some question that we all ask when we get in our, gangbang press conference type deals. And then later on, he was in town again, and he had a birthday party. So our station got invited to his birthday party, and it was on a Saturday, and I was doing the weekend sports that day. So I got to go to his birthday party as a reporter. And that's crazy to me because, like, where are you walking through your life and you're thinking, one day I'm going to be at Hank Aaron's birthday party. So that's probably the coolest moment.
Yep.
Now, the biggest thing I ever covered didn't really have a whole lot to do with sports. I went to Iraq in 2006 with Fox Sports Net. It was me and a producer, Chris Withers, and then Ben West, who was a photographer for Channel 9. We all went over. Spent time before we talked to the Minnesota National Guard members, their wives. We talked to them prior to going. Then we went over there and then hooked up with these guys who we identified 6 soldiers that we were going to talk to from the Minnesota National Guard. We did some sports, like we did a boxing story and a hockey story, floor hockey story, and some other stuff, but more human interest stuff. And I broadcasted live on top of a building in Balad, Iraq. That's crazy, right? It's got nothing to do with sports. And when you grow up to want to be a sportscaster, it's not something that you get into, or you think that's going to happen. So I can't imagine there's anything in my life that I would have covered more, I guess, powerful of an experience as that would have been. And just from again, why am I here kind of thing for a lot, not why am I here? Like, why the heck am I here? But, I'm a sportscaster now. I'm in Iraq with these troops, covering troops in a war. It was just so powerful and just kind of really mind blowing, and kind of changed my perspective, I guess, on some other stuff that we covered, or in general as a sportscaster. So I know it's kind of a rambling answer, but so those couple of experiences, are what I remember. And there's just other day-to-day stuff, but, where the peak is, I guess it depends, right? Where did I make the most money? That was when I was with FSN, right? What was the most high profile? I guess it depends. Cause I also I did, one freelance gig for ESPN. I did sideline reporting for the women's national basketball tournament. So that's a national event. It was on, that was probably on ESPN2, but then I did some hits that went on, ESPN and ESPN News. So is that the most exposure? Maybe. I did some stuff with Big Ten Network where I did sideline reporting for football games, and would do some, I hate using technical jargon, but packages, where I would go to Wednesday press conferences and then go to games and get post game, and then they would go on their show. So that was regional. So yeah, I guess it depends on what pinnacle means. And I guess I never, I don't know what that was.
The Iraq memory, when you were going there, when you heard that you were going to do this and going there, was it as big of a deal as being there or now looking back? Where did it really set in as how huge that was?
Well, it relative to the whole thing, it was small from what we were doing, but I think it had a big impact on the people that were there for the time that we were there. Because it gave them, and like some of the guys we talked to, it's just a distraction, or it's a taste of home. Because we brought over like T-shirts, we brought videos of their wives. We just talked about stuff. So it was a distraction for some of those guys. So that was kind of cool. But I guess it's one of those things where actually a friend of mine was here last night and he goes, "What was that like?" And I said, "It's not like anything, because there's nothing to describe it that I can compare it to." But going there, like when I got asked to do it, I said yes. Well, I think at the time I probably said, I got to talk to Nikki, but I was going to do it, whatever. Either way, I was going to go, because to me it was like it was an experience that I would have gotten any other way. So when I decided that I wanted to do it, which didn't take me any time to decide I wanted to do it, then you were in, and then you get to the airport, and then you're there, and just all these kind of steps go, and you kind of let yourself go. But it was. I didn't know what to expect when I got there. And then you're also busy, right? You're doing stories and you're kind of doing the same stuff that you do daily. Although at a quicker pace and a different environment and with different people. But, it's really hard to explain, what the experience was like, because it wasn't like anything I'd ever done before. We did some really good stories. We had great stories. We had really good participation. I felt really safe while we were over there. But once we got back, I have the memory, like I said, I have the memories of it, and the guys that I went with had the memories of it. But then it just kind of went away, for the most part.
And you got back to covering.
Then you just get back to covering
meaningless sports games, especially.
Well, yeah, I'm not going to call it meaningless.
Well,
but yeah,
looking back in history now, they're less meaningful, I guess, is what I think.
Yeah, it's a different thing to cover, but it's something I think about daily, and there's lots of reminders around my house and just people that I run into or watching the news. It's hard to explain exactly what the experience was like, but it was the best experience from a broadcast standpoint, I think, possible. And anything I did after that couldn't beat that.
The other thing I remember you telling me at times that was non-sports related is you were kind of right in the middle of when 9/11 happened. You were a sports guy then at that time, but you became a news guy. I'm sure pretty much everyone that was working in media, if they were doing any reporting, they were reporting news for a few days or a couple of weeks there. Yep.
Yeah. And I'm going to answer that question too, but I just remembered something that I forgot. We were the first and only, and still to this day, the only sports crew to be embedded in a war in the United States ever. So I was the only sports reporter ever to do that. Our producer was the only producer ever to do that. Our photographer was the only sports photographer to do that. Although our photographer is now like a worldwide. He works for Fox News now and is everywhere. There's a big story. He goes there. So yeah, we were the only sports crew ever to do what we did. And it hasn't happened since, and I can't imagine it would.
And why were you guys?
You're testing my, memory here a little bit, but I believe FSN St. Louis or whatever it was called at that time did some sort of live talk back with, there was a Cardinals game, and I believe they did some sort of live talk back with troops in, I believe it was Iraq. And so we were all on the FSN family, and then somewhere along the line, I don't know if it was locally here in Minneapolis or if it was, the Minnesota National Guard or where it came from. The idea was like, let's send somebody over there. So that grew out of, I believe, this idea that happened in St. Louis to kind of take it to the next step and send somebody over there.
Okay.
But it had never happened before, and it hasn't happened since. Like people go to Kuwait, which we went through Kuwait to get there, but there, ESPN's been to Kuwait, and even, I think locally there's been some broadcast crews for sports to go to Kuwait. But there's not a war in Kuwait. So that's where the difference comes.
Yeah, for sure.
It was in a wartime. But yeah, to your question, yeah. So 9/11, I had just moved from St. Paul at the time to Johnstown, Pennsylvania, which is about 70 miles southeast or so of Pittsburgh. And Flight 93, I moved there August 8th of 2001 for a TV job. I was a weekend sports anchor at a television station out there. So I moved there for that. I worked, my schedule was Wednesday to Sunday. So my days off were Monday and Tuesday. Mm-hmm. And at this point, I was 25 years old or something like that. So I had no reason to get up in the morning, especially on an off day. So it was Tuesday that morning. I got my phone rang, and it was a friend of mine from here. And she was like, "Hey, did you see what's going on?" And I said, "No." And she goes, "Turn on the TV." So I turned on, I believe it was the NBC affiliate, and it was our local news that was on. And she said, yes, she said somebody knocked down the Twin Towers or whatever. I forget exactly how she worded it. So I turned it on. Our local news was on, where everybody else around the country was watching probably the Today Show or the Good Morning America or whatever it was. But our, Flight 93, went down in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, which was just outside of 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes outside of Johnstown. So that really gave 9/11 a different feel for us, because then it was a local story. And at that point, nobody had really any idea what was happening. So I called into my station. I said, "Hey, do you need me to come in?" They said, "Yeah, can you come in?" So I went in, and then I ended up, with one of the news photographers. And this is a really small television. So we had like 8 people or 9 people or something like that. And they'll run the whole operation as far as the news goes. So I went out with one of our, reporters, and we went to some bar and interviewed some people. And still at this point, we had no clue what was happening. And there was all these rumors going around about where that plane was headed and who did it and what happened and all that. So I spent a lot of that morning driving around. And, this is 2011, so you can't just jump on your phone and figure everything else out like you can today. So we really didn't have a whole lot of knowledge of what was going on. And then we came back to the station, found out some more stuff. Then when we went back out, and I ended up doing a story, I met somebody at a park, who had said they had a son who was in the Pentagon and a daughter that was somewhere else. And then, that night we did a wall to wall. So I didn't do any sport. We blew out the sports, and we did a wall to wall, commercial free, except 1 minute of weather and 34 minutes or whatever it was of news, just all on 9/11 stories. So our perspective was a little different on what was happening. A couple of reasons, because I was watching it from a newsroom or a news reporter's perspective. So then you take it in a little differently, because you're watching stuff and you're editing video and writing stories and stuff. So it's harder, I think, to sometimes grasp what's actually going on. Mm-hmm. And then from a local perspective, where one of the planes went down just outside of town, really changed how probably my perspective would have been had I been, say if I was living in St. Paul, instead. And then there's a guy, Mike Woodley, who's a local broadcaster here in town. He was at the time working at, I think it was called the Minnesota News Network at that time. He had gotten hooked up with me. I'd known Mike for a while. And then, I want to say our friend Langdon maybe hooked us up together with a conversation, but he had me on his morning show here as a the local Angle Minnesotan in, close to the area. So I did an interview on the radio with him. And then the next couple of days, we just kind of did follow-ups and then sort of got back to normal after that.
Did you ever go to that crash site?
Not till after. Yeah, not till years after. Like, I went to the memorial, so never the crash site.
So as it turns out, some of the big memories are nothing to do with any game or event, really.
Yeah, it's and a lot of that stuff is just life. Like, that's probably the biggest thing I got out of my sportscasting career, is just the life experiences. Mm-hmm. Like, I went to St. Cloud State and majored in broadcasting there. I did an interview with like Ken Patera. If you're probably not.
The name sounds.
He was a wrestler. I actually interviewed Paul Molitor over the phone, but he did a camp for kids that benefited kids with AIDS. So I got to do some cool stuff that I would have never necessarily gotten to do if I was a business major or something else, which is actually what I originally went to school for. And then I moved, got out of college and then got a job, and then working in broadcasting, and I got to cover sports for do exactly what it is that I want to do, which is rewarding. And then just the people that you cross with, like, there's people who I worked with at that early stage in life who are big shots now in the business, either here locally or even nationally. And that's just really cool to have that experience. Or there's people that I met, like I met Daryl Strawberry at he was on a book tour at the St. Paul Saints, and said that he was done with, all the troubles in his life. And then he got in trouble again after that.
Oh no.
Like right out of college, I covered Joe Mauer when he was 16 years old. There's a ton of kids that I covered in high school or college that went on to do some stuff. And then I moved, everybody got laid off from that job because of a corporate buyout. Then I moved to Johnstown, Pennsylvania. And when I was there, I got to cover the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I covered Penn State football and other high school stuff. And there's some high school kids that we covered there that went on to be professional athletes. And the experience, like I packed up my car and got a U-Haul and drove to Pennsylvania. Now I live in Pennsylvania, and covering sports there. And so that just life experience of being that young and being on my own and, going after this dream that I had. I remember that. And then, I ended up getting a job in Mobile, Alabama, and I packed all my stuff. I didn't have a U-Haul. I packed all my stuff in my car and drove to Mobile, Alabama.
Which means you probably learned to leave some things behind.
Well, I didn't have any stuff. Okay. I wasn't making any money. I didn't have any money to buy any stuff. But yeah, so then the life experience of getting up and moving and going and living in Mobile, Alabama, and the things that I got to experience and cover there. And then I came back here and worked at Fox Sports Net, and that brought me back to be closer to some family members and, being able to cover the team. Like I was, a Twins fan and a Timberwolves fan and, and Minnesota sports fan, and got to cover those teams. And it's funny because people are always, this is a dream job. That job didn't exist when I left town, right? Because before, Fox Sports Net's not that old, relatively speaking. No. It was MSC. It was right? MSC prior to that, and they didn't have everything that they had now. So the job as it was didn't exist. So it wasn't like I was in college aspiring to get this position, because it didn't exist. But then when I got it, it was great. Because then I came in when they started it was called FSN Live at that point, and now it's Twins Live, Wolves Live, Wild Live. So I was in at the kind of the start of all that. It was a new thing, and it was great. And then I got to do more game broadcasts, which is when I really started having fun, was doing the games, like being out at events. So it's much better energy and things like that than being at a studio. So yeah, I got that experience, and then I got the experience of getting fired from a job, the only job that I ever wanted to have, the only career I wanted to have. Mm-hmm. Went through that, but then bounced back and then started doing some stuff at Big Ten Network, which again didn't exist a year. I think I got fired in 2007. I think Big Ten Network went on the air in 2007. So I got to start doing work with them. And then I got a chance to get a freelance job at ESPN doing, the sideline reporting for the women's college basketball tournament. So that's a life experience. I actually auditioned at SportsCenter, didn't get it, obviously. But it was a life experience. It's one of those, the experience you get in life through all these things, they can't be taken away from you. Cause you got to do them. So, and then after that, I was out of TV I did some stuff. I went back to the St. Paul Saints and did some stuff there, with them as far as broadcasting went, and made actually good relationships doing that. I think there was one, I want to say it was 2010 was the only year. So from basically when I first started in college radio in 1996 ? So I think 1997 was probably the first full year that I did broadcasting. The first time I never did a single piece of broadcasting was 2010. So from 1997 to 2009, I had done some capacity, whether it was radio or TV or a combination or whatever, some sort of capacity. And I was okay and I was done with it. But then maybe it was 2011. I forget, one of those 2 years. There was one full year where I didn't do anything. Okay. And then I randomly applied for a job in Nashville, Tennessee, and got it.
Why'd you apply?
I had always kept up on, there was a job board, a couple of job boards that I always kept up on. And at the time, I did a bunch of random other stuff too. I sold insurance for like 6 months, and I was working at Ameriprise, working like in mutual fund customer service, because I needed to figure out what else it was. Cause I was done. I was like, okay, TV is done. It was a good run. Let's go get a real job and figure it out. So that's what I was actually focused on, but I still kept my eye out on what jobs were available, and just what was kind of going on in the industry. And I still had friends in the industry and things like that. But, my wife went on a trip because her company has an office in Nashville. One of their clients were in Nashville. And then I was reading one of these sports job blogs, and there was a job in Nashville, and I was like, well, that's interesting. So I applied, I sent my resume tape. Actually it was probably a DVD at that point.
The word tape is still used a lot. And I right. No, not anymore.
Yeah. Well, that was probably,
probably then though.
Yeah. That was a DVD I sent to them.
They would have still accepted a tape maybe.
Well, maybe I'm sure. Yeah. Well, I don't know. But then I applied, and then they called me up and said, hey, we want to bring you down here. So I for an interview. So I said to my wife, "Hey, what do you think of Nashville?" She goes, "Yeah, it was fun. We, hung out and liked it and blah, blah, blah." And I said, "Well, yeah, I've got nothing to lose." Right. So I went down there, interviewed for the job. I was the number, and this is again, technical talk, but it was the number 3 guy job.
3. So there's two that had better hours or better gigs within the job. Right.
So your main sports anchor, your sports director, generally what they call that person, depending on the market, anchors Monday through Friday. Some of them are Tuesday through Sunday because Sunday is a big sports day. So it depends. But so 5 days a week, that's the anchor. And then you have a weekend person who anchors either Friday and Saturday or Saturday and Sunday. Then you have the number 3 guy. So you do whatever they tell you. And whenever somebody's sick or doesn't want to work or whatever, then that's your job to do this. So that's what I did. So I got hired to do that. And I said to my, "Hey, do you want to go down there?" She was, "Yeah." And she was like, "I can just transfer to this other office." And so we did it. Then we just moved to Nashville. And so I lived in Nashville for a year, and that's where my first daughter was born. So that's a life experience. So sportscasting and television brought me through a whole bunch of life experiences. And then it got me to the point where I had my first daughter, and I was like, this sucks that I have this job that I don't really want to be at. And we live in Nashville for no apparent reason. Now I want to go be a dad and do something different. So then I said to and she wasn't that happy either, my wife. She was fine with me being there for my career, but the reality was either I was going to I had a 2-year contract. I was going to stay there for 2 years and go try to move to random city, USA, somewhere else, or stay in Nashville. But I didn't want to do that. And I had some other priorities now that I had a baby, and I'd been married now for a few years at that point. So I said, "I'll quit and we can move back to Minnesota." And she said, "Yeah, let's do it." So then I quit, moved back to Minnesota, and then had to figure out again what I wanted to do. But that experience taught me that I thought I needed that job. I thought I needed to go to Nashville and be back in TV because I thought it's really what I needed to be happy and make myself feel some worth or something like that. But I learned that I didn't need it anymore. So, which was still a valuable experience to know that your decision to give it up initially was probably the right one at the right time. Well, initially I didn't give it up. Yes and no. I struggled to find a job really. Once I got fired at FSN, I got some freelance stuff, which was great. It was just really inconsistent. I interviewed for places I got interviewed in Philadelphia at Comcast Sportsnet, and actually a friend of mine got that job. And then I interviewed at SNY in New York. I interviewed for a morning news show in St. Louis, Atlanta at a television station there, a sports station there. They didn't hire me because they were concerned that I couldn't go from, how they put it, from regional back to local news. Mm-hmm. But then they hired a guy who used to be at ESPN and didn't work out for him. And a couple other places. So yeah, I was trying to get back in and I just couldn't. So it wasn't necessarily me I gave up on trying because I realized that I couldn't get a position. And I had a chance to go to Lincoln, I think it was, or maybe it was Lincoln or Omaha, I forget, but it just wasn't something that made me that excited. So I had some other smaller opportunities, but didn't want to do that because I wanted to be, I felt at that point, if I couldn't be at a level that I want to do, then there's no need to do it anymore. But then Nashville was kind of a reset. And then I realized I didn't need it. So I didn't, so first I got kicked out, and couldn't get back into the level I wanted, but then I got back in and I realized I didn't need it anymore. Yeah, it's kind of the level you want. At a certain point, you can't accept something at a certain level. And clearly once you'd reached a certain point, going back to, random Nebraska city that sounds a lot worse than going to Nashville. Right. Yeah. Nashville was a great town, and a great market. And at that point it was still growing. And it was a good life experience. It's just that as the backup on a local news station wasn't that fun for me after some of the things that I had been doing. It just wasn't. And maybe that showed a lot about my passion because people are really there are people who are extremely passionate about sports coverage and don't care about where they live or how much money they make or what their job is. They just want to cover sports. Mm-hmm. I learned that wasn't me. But previously it was. And it was for me at some point too, yep. And it left me. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it was me. I'd be willing to do whatever, just to be in the career. But then I realized that wasn't me anymore. And that was, it took going to Nashville to realize that was the case. So I left and, I walked out of the studio, got into my car and drove home. And my wife had already left town, and the next day got in the U-Haul and left, and that was good. You told them you were leaving though, right? Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. I gave them some notice. Okay, good. Yeah. And, my news director told me I was dumb for leaving. But that was his opinion.
Oh, well, you can't make everybody happy.
Right. So the life experiences are what I got most out of Sportscast. And there's a lot to say. I think I did what I wanted to do. And that's something that not a lot of people get to say. I had fun doing it, and all in, whether you count college or not, I did it for about 12 years professionally, another 3 years or so in college. And that was pretty good for what I expected getting into it as a 19 years old or whatever I was at that time.
Yeah, it sounds like a pretty good career to have and all those experiences. But I look at life and just know that to do the same thing forever seems unlikely. And as I dabble in this now, and who knows what happens next, I'm assuming it'll be some very different things from time to time. And I recently saw that you made a big announcement personally. You've been in a different career for a while, but even have taken that to a new level. So if you want to get into that. Yeah.
So I got into real estate. I'm a real estate agent. And the law requires that I'm not allowed to talk about real estate without saying my brokerage.
Okay.
So I started my own brokerage. It's called Crosstown Home Team. But yeah, I got into real estate in 2013 for a couple of different reasons. So I was working, we had moved back. So I owned a house in St. Paul. And my wife owned a condo in Minneapolis when we met each other. She owned her condo, and I was in the process of buying my house. And then we kind of, hung out and dated, and figuring out what we were. Mm-hmm. And then we got serious and ended up getting married and all that. But, so we moved to Nashville, and I owned a house and she owned a condo still. She moved into my house and we were renting her condo. So we were married, living in my house, and rented out her condo, and we tried to sell it and couldn't. And then we were managing her we had her place we had as a rental for like 6 years or 7 years or something like that. And then we moved to Nashville, rented out my place. We rented a place in Nashville for ourselves, and then we're renting our places back here in Minnesota. Then we moved back. I quit my job, moved back. We had nowhere to go because my house was rented and her condo was rented.
You owned two places, but you couldn't live in either one.
Exactly. Yep. So we stayed with her parents, with Nikki's parents, at their house in Blaine for a couple of months. And then we were shopping for another house. So we ended up buying a house in Golden Valley. So we lived there. And then going through that process, I was like, well, this is something that I think I could be interested in doing. Talked to my wife about it. And then, started studying for my real estate license while I was working full time at Ameriprise. At this point, I had a Series 6 and 63 financial services license that I had gotten along the way somewhere as I figured out what I wanted to do when I grew up. So I got a job at Ameriprise downtown, working in there. At this point, I worked in their mutual funds division before I went to Nashville. So I came back and then got a job working with annuities, on the phone. So clients and advisors would call up and have questions and issues and things like that you'd have to handle over the phone. That was a job. It was something I needed just to, pay the bills while I figured out what it is that I wanted to do. Cause I knew it wasn't going to be TV anymore. And then, so I studied for my real estate license and then got really interested in doing that through the process of the test and the schooling. And then also through the process of when we bought our house in Golden Valley. So I started part-time working in real estate for a team. It was a team, husband and wife team. And I kind of supported their client. They had a team of people who would support their clients. So I did that part-time for a while and then, got a little bit in the real estate sales part of it, and then quit my full-time job. And then that was in 2014. And since then things got really good for me at 2015-ish, really good in 16, 17, and then 18. And then this past fall, I decided I wanted to give it a shot at starting my own brokerage. So I started Crosstown Home Team. So now I own my own independent real estate brokerage.
So how is that going to change your life day to day from what you were doing most recently? Yeah,
day to day, not a whole lot. Great big picture, it changes in that I'm now responsible for the whole thing. But I'm not telling you anything you don't know. It's your family business. Real estate.
I even asked my sister. I didn't really ask permission, but I told her, okay, I'm going to have Ron on, and he's going to talk about his real estate. So.
Right. Yeah. That's But you're an independent person working for a brokerage. Generally, when you're a real estate agent who works for one of the brands or bigger or smaller brands. So you still run your own show for the most part. So I still run my own show, except I own the company. So that means there's more, I carry more risk, and there's some expenses and things like that. I'm in charge of so I'm in charge of the marketing of the company and the marketing of myself. I'm in charge of all the paperwork and processes, and that's outside of just the regular, hey, you're my client, let's go buy and sell your house kind of thing. So from the day to day, it doesn't change a whole lot, just more grand scheme, big picture things. Like the last few days I've been working on my website. That's what I've been doing the last couple of days, or like ordering business cards and figuring out what the look and feel of my brand is. So that's stuff that I didn't have to do before. I work out of my home now. I've always had I never had my own office at an office, but I had there's like a community place that anybody who doesn't have a specific office can go and kind of hang out. I hardly ever spent a lot of time at one of those offices anyway, but I work fully from home or at a coffee shop or out of my car or wherever. So, not a whole lot, like I said, from a daily standpoint changes. There's just more responsibility. It's more exciting for me now, because I've got more stake in the game. Yeah. So that's kind of how that goes.
So I suppose you're envisioning this going well, and if it does, this might be the final career move for you.
Oh, I don't want to say that.
You don't look at it that way?
No. Well, I guess that depends on some things, but no, assuming something doesn't happen in the world that I can't control, which is everything. But I think in my world, real estate, the career is probably my final stop. I want to get also move into more investing, and real estate investing, but having my own brokerage allows me to do some things that I couldn't necessarily do when I was working for a bigger brokerage, just from a cost standpoint and a fee standpoint and things like that. But yeah, whether I'll be the owner of a real estate brokerage forever, I don't want to say that, but I think real estate itself as a career is a field is something that I'll stay in for a long time. So
this has been a big time, and does it bring excitement, happiness, stress?
All of it, mostly. Not a lot of stress right now. The stressful part was just applying for you have to apply through the state. And then you have to, there's a lot of paperwork and systems that you have to apply through and money and getting things set up. So that was probably the stressful part. But then once I got approved, because like I said, it's still selling a house. So I don't do anything differently. Making this up, let's say yesterday I was not with my brokerage, and today nothing yesterday would have changed from the client standpoint as it was today, except my email signature has a different logo at the bottom of it, or the way that I deal and talk to people is no different. I had to change my voicemail and my email signature and my branding and business cards. Otherwise, the job as a real estate agent doesn't change. There's just an added responsibility of being a broker. And at the moment, it's just me. So I don't have any people under me. Once I start bringing more people in under me, then that'll change, probably bring on some more level of stress, but also excitement. Because like for me, I used to be a sportscaster, right? That's all I ever wanted to do. And now I sell houses, and I've done fairly well at it. So if I can take somebody else who was on some other path and help them get to whatever they think is successful, that'd be rewarding as well.
When you switch like that, is there something technically, legally you need to do with having clients of a previous life and to your new one?
Yep. Yeah. So it depends, because you have your contracts, or your clients are under contracts. It's a little more challenging if you have a listing, because technically your brokerage has a listing. So if you're an agent and you've got your mom's house listed, that listing belongs to the brokerage, not you as an agent. So there's what you'd have to, go to your friend or your mom or your cousin or whoever's house and say, hey, and you got to kind of work that out.
Yeah.
And you may have some struggles with your broker. From the buyer standpoint, they belong to the brokerage as well, but they have a buyer's representation contract, which is relatively easy to cancel as long as both parties agree. So, as long as you're not, stealing clients or like information from your other place, you generally are going to be okay. So
a bit of a transitionary period now, but pretty soon it'll be smooth, at least in that regard. Yeah.
Yep. And all of the business that I've ever gotten has come from, when I initially started on a team, and that team generated business. Outside of that, every house I've ever sold came from my efforts. Or, somebody referred them to me, or somebody I knew, so those are all my people. So I never made any money from the brokerage as far as gaining clients because I was at a particular brokerage. So, my network of people Like I put my post on Facebook and I looked today and there was 180 comments and like 190 likes on it.
Wow. You're popular, Ron.
Well, but a lot of those people are people that I went to high school with or college with or worked with or whatever, and who either reached out to me at some point and knew I was doing real estate and said, hey, can you help me out? Or can you sell my mom's house? Or can you sell my friend's house? Or, can you help this person? So, all those, the sales, came from me and my past relationships and new relationships and things like that. They never came from the brand of the company that I was working with.
Clearly everyone that's seen that knows you've made this change, and as they communicate with you, they'll recognize that even before you talk to them, I suppose.
Yeah. And that's the hope too. And I'm not saying like, I very rarely post real estate stuff on my Facebook page. But that was something, again, from a legal standpoint, you have to, it's better. You're safer from a compliance standpoint to have your real estate, like where it says on Facebook, like, what do you do for a job or something like that? You have to be clear about that. And then I just wanted people to know just that this is what I'm doing now. But I won't continue. I have a business page that I do my business stuff on, but on my personal page, I don't constantly hit people over the head with what I'm trying to sell. But yeah, I just wanted people to know that it was kind of a new, exciting adventure for me. And that's what I was doing. Cause you run into people, like we all run into people, hey, what are you up to? Right.
Yep.
And then when you say I'm up to XYZ and they say, oh, how's that going? Right. It's the same conversation we have with all people. So I just figured I'd put it out there and let everybody know what was going on.
Yeah, that's that type of conversation. Although I participate in often, is really that type of thing is one of my least favorite things.
Yeah.
But now I have a podcast, so I tell people about that. And I'm more excited about it.
Right.
And you'll probably be more excited to talk about your new brokerage than even you were before.
Yeah. Because it's a different challenge, and it's something I get to create from the ground up, and sort of, but it's exciting, and I can really own it and kind of do some things that I want to do that I wasn't able to do before. And I got a ton of experience working for the bigger companies too, so that's helped me out a lot. But yeah, I want to get out there and do it on my own, and I think it'll work out.
And one more time with the name of it, and I'll put a little link in the show notes here so someone can find it if they wanted to.
Sure. Crosstown Home Team. It's a play on Crosstown 62.
And I liked your logo. It seemed sports related, home related, at least, or maybe I'm missing something.
You're thinking of a different
no, really? Okay. No, I'll have to look at it. There's
a road, and it says Crosstown Home Team.
For some reason, I thought maybe the home looked like home plate or something, but I could just.
No, that's a different. You're thinking of a different guest.
I'll have to look again. Okay.
Yeah, you just accidentally called me your ex-girlfriend's name.
No, I don't think so. Okay, so I have two other things I want to cover. One other topic that I think you'd offer perspective for me that I don't have as a part of this project, this podcast is. I'm small town Minnesota white guy with certain experiences. And when I'm talking to someone that certainly is going to have some different perspectives on things, I'd like to get that. So you have racial, interracial type of things that maybe have come up in your life that are different than mine. So I guess I'll throw it out like that. What in 2018 or I guess 2019 now, what stands out to you in that regard? Any moments that happen in your day-to-day life that surprise you still?
Every moment that's happened in it's hard to point out a day-to-day thing because it's my life.
Yeah.
And to your point, like people will say, well, what's your perspective as and they pick the category that they want to ask you. But that's a really hard question for me to answer because everything that happens to me every day doesn't just happen to me in a category. Mm-hmm. Like it doesn't happen to me as a 42-year-old. It doesn't happen to me as a father. It doesn't happen, it just happens. Right. And so all the things that make up who you are affect how you view those things. I think, there was a reporter years ago who asked Randall Cunningham, how long have you been a black quarterback? Right. So, and I always think of that and I don't remember even what his response was, but, it's hard to just segment in my head because of all the, and you meant so my dad is black. My mom is white. I was born in Trenton, New Jersey. I moved to Chaska High School. Then went to Chaska High School. I went to St. Cloud State. I moved to Johnstown, Pennsylvania, Mobile, Alabama, to St. Paul, to Nashville, Tennessee. And so all of those things make up who I am.
And you're probably looked at differently depending on where you're at. Or maybe not. Sure,
probably.
I guess you can't see their perspective.
Right. So I don't know what I expect in 2019 because I guess for me, I do my thing Like I just started my own real estate brokerage because I wanted to do that. I didn't look and say, well, can I be successful at this because of this reason? I just said, can I make this happen because of my past experiences? So I don't know. You stumped me with your question.
Yeah, and maybe
I don't think flipping a calendar changes anything either. So are we any better off today than we were yesterday? Probably not. Could we be better tomorrow? Hopefully. But I don't know. The way that I've lived my life and the way that I've been raised and who my family is and my past and who I deal with is just, it's a diverse mix of people, truly diverse mix of people, in a variety of senses. Cause I also I think what gets missed is, so we pick a group that we call a diverse group, but inside that group, guess what there is?
More diversity.
Exactly. Right. So, because you mentioned, like me and you were both St. Cloud State guys, right? So, but we didn't have the same experience, because we were there at different times, or we're different people, or we can't, so it's hard for me to just say, okay, well, from this perspective as, who I am, then this is what I think about how the world goes. Yeah, I think can we treat each other a little better? Yeah. Will racial injustices be solved? No. Can we get better at it? Yes. Is the world going to end every time that somebody gets mad at somebody? No. I think there's a ton of, I guess my point is, I think there's a lot of overreaction to events and a lot of overcorrection. So I think if we can, not overreact on whether it's, this is the worst thing that's ever happened in the world, or this is the best thing that's ever happened, or this is the only solution, then I think we'll be a little better off. So I don't know. This probably isn't answering your question.
I don't know. And I think it kind of does, because it doesn't seem to play a big role in your thinking. You're living as a person and without putting yourself into any category or expecting anyone else maybe to put you into in a category.
Right. When I walk out the door, I don't think, oh, okay, I'm not going to be able to make it because of this, or I'm going to be able to make it because of this. I really believe that for me, the success I've had has to do with the people around me. And as long as I have good people around me, then I'll do okay. And yeah, I'm not afraid to, to start. Like I wasn't afraid to start a business because it had nothing to do with the economy or politics or perceptions or anything. It was just something I wanted to do. So I did it. Or, like we live in Edina. We live here because we wanted our girls to go to a top school. So I did it. So I don't know. I guess I try not to get hung up on what's going to stop me or prevent me or what the problems are out there, and just kind of navigate my way through. Not that I don't want to sound like I'm some kind of buried in the sand person, because I'm definitely not. Mm-hmm. I have thoughts and opinions and all that kind of stuff, but it's never been something that's going to stop me from doing whatever it is that I want to do.
You don't look at the things that will slow you down maybe as much as what you know you can do to succeed.
If you try, sure. Yeah. Right. Because people, say, well, I can't do this because of the government, or I can't do this because of my wife, or I can't do this because of this reason. Well, you can't do it because you didn't try, mm-hmm. or maybe you didn't try very hard, or maybe you didn't try enough, or you didn't try differently.
And starting the sentence with "I can't" will probably prevent you from really doing much of anything.
Right. I don't know. If somebody wants to have a problem with me because of whatever it is that that particular person is judging me as, then that's their problem. So, and it's, my girls don't look like a lot of people. And it's my job and my wife's job to make sure that they understand that, but not be hindered by it. If that makes sense. Yeah.
Give them an awareness of why someone might perceive them to look different, or do you not even do that?
Well, not yet. We're working on like good wiping. So we got some other stuff that we're trying to work on. But no, it's our job to give them different experiences and expose them to different things and all that, so they can be successful in their environment, whatever that environment is, rather than telling them, I think, in my opinion, all the wrongs that are out there and that are going to stop them.
And if they do look different, which I'm not even necessarily sure that they do, I think that can be an advantage. People that kind of stand out in that way can be an advantage, especially if they have the right approach to life.
Possibly, depends what you're going to do. But it's possible. It depends.
So the parenting and the real estate, it sounds like your time is taken up quite a bit. Do you leave any time for anything outside of that?
Yeah.
To enjoy? What do you do?
Yeah. And that's it's funny when I get into real estate, people always ask about the schedule. Well, I used to be a sportscaster, and if you have a television, you know that the news is on at 10, depending on your time zone, you're on at 10 o'clock and you're on at 11 o'clock, and those people are actually there working at 10 or 11 o'clock. And the news is on, the sport, games are on the weekends, and so you're there working. So I worked a ton of nights and a ton of weekends, and just random events. But so with real estate, I actually have a lot more control over my schedule. If I don't, you don't make any money, but if you don't feel like working, you don't have to.
Yeah.
Or you can work when you want to and things like that. So I've got a lot of flexibility, but we, from a personal, I schedule with my daughters. We do every month, we do a daddy-daughter date night. That's always on my schedule, and that I don't do anything else except for that. For that I book it out on my calendar, and I won't schedule anything or change it. So that allows me to spend some time with them, just the two of us, and it also gives my wife a break. Then every 2 weeks, we do, my wife and I we call it Big People Date Night. So my wife and I always have a scheduled, every other week, a scheduled date. And then the other, figuring on a 4-week month, we do a family date night. So we always have a scheduled family date night, once a month. And then we'll do other stuff that comes up, but those are always scheduled to do that. So I try to spend as much time with them as possible. And then like my wife and I, sometimes we like to go out, we like to eat. So we go to different restaurants and check out different breweries and things around town. We travel a ton, with and without my girls. We'll travel. And then running a little bit, but, real estate and parenting, parenting takes over your life, but it doesn't have to mean you can't do anything ever. And real estate can take over your life if you let it. So I try to be really strict on what I need to do outside of that, so it doesn't take over too much.
It sounds like with some of the parenting and marriage plans or structured in your life are probably pretty useful. And I had the thought then, are there any other things that you think you're doing particularly well or good ideas that you have that you'd want to share with anybody?
I have no idea. I do what works for me. But yeah, I don't know. From like when going back to sportscasting, like I was at St. Cloud State and I didn't have any idea why I was there and what I was going to do. And then I met Jim Gray, who I think you must know from KBC. Yeah, I know. He lived on my floor and said, "Hey," and my roommate at the time, who I went to high school with, went to St. Cloud State to be a broadcaster. And Jim said, "Hey, you guys should come down and check out the radio station." So I was, that was never on my radar. And then I checked it out and I liked it and I never left until I had to. But so I don't know. I guess if there's something you want to do, and assuming you have all the, I think if there's something you want to do, you have to give it a shot. And whether you have the means or not, or you may think you don't have the means, and means can mean, a few different things. But when I went to KBSC, I didn't think that one day I'd be doing basketball on ESPN or living in Mobile, Alabama. So I think if there's something you want to do, you should go out and figure out how to do it, which is something that I think that I've done well, and realize that there are sacrifices, and things like that. And this is probably something that you experience as well too. Young broadcasters, we go and we're doing our college radio show and all that kind of stuff, and maybe do some college TV, and then you think you're just going to go out and make it, but then realistically you're going to make like $10 an hour maybe or something, and live in, who knows where, and it's not all that glorious and glamorous. But if you want to get to a level, then you've got to keep doing those steps. So I think I did that as a broadcaster. I hope. And then in real estate, I think I went in soft. I worked for somebody else. I didn't, like some people go in, straight commission, don't make any money, and then build their business. I kind of had a soft landing into it, but then so it's kind of a strategy, I guess, in case it didn't work out. I had an escape plan, but then when I started my own brokerage, I just had to go do it, rather than listen to reasons why I couldn't and why it wouldn't work out. So I think to answer your question, I think if somebody's out there and if you want to do something, whatever it is, do it. I heard I listened to a couple different podcasts, and one of them, it was a real estate podcast, and he said, everybody's always out there getting ready to get ready. Mm-hmm. Right. So, and I found myself doing that too with my brokerage. Because I was talking about it to myself and then, reading and doing all this stuff, but eventually you got to stop getting ready to get ready and you just do it. Right. So it's not going to be, everything can't be lined up perfect. And then you push a button and then you get into it. So eventually you have to stop getting ready to get ready and just be ready, if that makes any sense.
No, I agree. Like with my podcast, it was an idea. It was an idea in an idea state for probably far too long before I finally took a few actions that led to it even happening. And then I got, like, in this conversation, I got to remember, why am I doing this? And the part is, when I listen to podcasts, just hearing different people's opinions and ideas and perspectives, every once in a while something strikes me as being pretty valuable and useful. And that's what I'd hope out of any conversation, that some of that potential is there. So when I ask you that question, it's like, well, maybe what might be something that you could offer a potential listener that they might find useful? And when you talk about sportscasting, I realize I don't know how good I was or how good I could have been, but I know if I would have seeked out a mentor, like someone that's really done it at a higher level, that would have been willing to work with me, that probably would have been pretty useful, because I think I didn't make enough progress in the amount of years as I would have if I'd had someone. So I think probably no matter what anyone does, is having someone that's been there, done that is pretty respectable, that will kind of pull you along in a few moments where you're not sure what you're doing, I think could be pretty valuable to succeeding in any area.
Sure. Yeah. And just trying, right? You're not going to do anything you don't try, or, eventually you got to go for it. And then if you don't want to go for it, then you probably didn't want to do it in the beginning.
Yeah. I think even like the fact that we're here today, that me just deciding to show up to your house, it's led to a few neat things in this conversation. Sure. that was totally me deciding just to do something that was out of my comfort zone. And I find that, like, this podcast, and I'm sure even stepping out and having your own brokerage is pushing your boundaries a little bit more than you were maybe feeling like you were ready for, but you did it anyhow.
Right. Because again, like I said, you have to, at some point, you can't wait for the perfect day.
No, it won't come.
Because it will never come. Right. So, and then you're just kind of stuck. And so I just had to go for it and do it.
Let's get to the final segment of the show, the being wrong segment. Sure. Ron, I warned you a little bit, primed you to see if you'd come up with something that you can look back in your life now and say that, yep, I was wrong about that. If so, what is that?
It's an interesting question. It stumped me because I'm wrong about stuff every day. Mm-hmm. But I have a notebook here, and I took one note. And I wrote church. So I am not at all I'm not religious. We grew up, my mother was Catholic and my dad was Baptist, but we grew up in a situation where I would be with my dad on the weekends and my mom on the weekdays until we moved to Minnesota. But anyway, so eventually, we went to church with my dad mostly for a while, and then we got older, and the every other weekend, or the weekend thing changed, and then life kind of changed a little bit. And then we moved to Minnesota and just quit going to church. But as a teenager, college age, young adult, was really turned off by organized religion. So I thought that, like, unless there's a wedding and there's an open bar, I'm not going to church, right? Mm-hmm. Or a funeral, I suppose, would be the other reason. But so I never voluntarily went to church since I can't even remember when, other than if it was a funeral or a wedding. And I was okay with that because I just felt that I think it's just another way to divide people, unfortunately, right? So just organized religion turned me off. So I never really wanted anything to do with a particular church or particular denomination or religion. But then, and when I met my wife, she grew up Lutheran, and she went to church every day. And then she said, as an adult, she was like, well, I don't want to go to church because I was forced to go as a kid. So we were fortunate enough to, I guess, sort of connect on that. But then we had our first daughter, and we said, well, we'd like her to be at least exposed to some sort of religion, or spirituality, or however you want to define it, just so then she can be in a position one day to make a decision for herself. And then we had our other daughter. And then so we started going to a church downtown, which was one, and I like Googled something along the lines of non-denominational churches or open churches or whatever. So we started going to church downtown, and it was fine. And then we found another, once we moved here, we found another one in South Minneapolis, called Park Avenue United Methodist Church. And a couple of reasons we went there was the congregation is extremely diverse, like in the real literal sense of the word diverse, like not like one person that looks different than everybody else. So you say it's diverse.
Yeah.
Young, old, black, white, different religions, the whole deal. So we started going there. We liked it. And then because we wanted to expose, our daughters to just people that are different than the kids that she's going to see at school. And also just from a social standpoint, me and Nikki could meet other people. So it's still, I guess the purpose of going to church can be different, which is something I never thought about. So we use it more as a social thing, and a way to meet people and exposure for our daughters and opportunity for them versus going there and thinking, okay, this preacher's going to get up there and yell at me for an hour about God. Mm-hmm. So being wrong about what that church has to have a singular purpose, I guess would be my answer.
Yeah, I don't know if you've caught many or any of the podcasts yet, but one of the things, religion's been one of the things that's come up here, and I label myself as an atheist, and I'm not involved with church anymore, but one thing I do see the value in why church is still so successful, at least in part, is it is a place for community, something to put on the schedule, something to do like every week or whenever you can. And I do see great value in having that type of thing or things like that. So I totally understand why people go, at least in that regard. So I think you're the way you label, or the way you're saying it is, the big motivating factor is to have a place to go, to meet people, to kind of see different things and hang out. And it's much less, at least at this point, about the connectedness through a religious or a spiritual belief.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. So I was completely off, my head was always, well, yeah, you go to church and they preach at you and you got to live these ideals, and there's a ton of hypocrisy, and, churches on Sunday. We know some of those people were doing some things on Saturday.
Yeah. I get that.
That they maybe shouldn't have been doing. Which is your business. But yeah, so yeah, there's a lot more to it, I think, than just the religious. Granted, it's based in religion, but there's more things that you can get out of it than it just having to be about religion.
Something to think about. It certainly, yeah. I like to generate thought for myself and potentially for others, and just sure. the meaning and the value of why someone goes. I'm not sure if maybe everyone kind of thinks about that, and maybe people just have the habit and they go and they haven't really thought about that. So I think it's a good thing to think about, and it's good to know that you were wrong about something. Just one thing.
I'm wrong every single day.
Right, every day.
Yep, I've been wrong every single day. I was right though today. When I was working out, I listened to your podcast with John. The first episode, the first part.
I had 2 parts with him.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I listened to that, most of the first part of that. So I was wrong for not listening earlier.
No, it's okay. The most important thing is to tell everybody that you know to listen to this episode. And,
that's right.
And maybe they'll create 1 or 2 extra fans out of that.
Yeah. And I listened to John because I knew him, because that's what I said earlier in this conversation, is I listen to podcasts when there's people on there that I know.
That help. And this is People I Know show, so it all plays together. Ron Johnson, thank you for your time today. And best of fortunes with your brokerage. The name one more time.
Crosstown Home Team.
Crosstown Home Team. Okay.
All right. We'll see you at the party this summer.
I will be there most likely. Thanks for listening to People I Know show. If you check the show notes, you'll see a link to Ron's website for Crosstown Home Team. A reminder, please take a few moments to rate and review People I Know show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. And remember, you can search for and follow People I Know show on Facebook or Instagram to see photos, videos, and interact with the podcast or with me directly. If you like the show, please encourage someone new to listen or share your favorite episode on social media. And feel free to email your feedback for the show directly to me, Curt Carstensen, by using the email address peopleiknowshow@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.